I want to talk about the value of quoting Beit Shammai first. Okay? No, the value of quoting Beit Shammai first.
Really? Oh, okay.
Okay?
Oh.
The Gemara in Eruvin says it's a whole issue. The law was established according to Beis Hillel. So how did the law become? The argument between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, it went on for years that no one established the law, so people who followed Beis Shammai could follow Beis Shammai, people who followed Beis Hillel could follow Beis Hillel. But then there came a time where people wanted a specific decision. Who should we follow? And the problem was there was actually a halachic dispute. You go after the majority. The problem is you don't go after the majority of anyone. Okay, you have to go after a majority of a certain type of scholarship. So the machloket of Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai was that in terms of the general amount of people who were chachamim, Beis Hillel was in the majority. So if you just took a vote based on majority, you'd follow Beis Hillel. The problem was Beis Shammai was still, in terms of knowledge and intellect, were considered to be smarter. So they said that in terms of what you're looking at, in terms of the majority, you're taking too large a population. So Beis Hillel is too large of a population. Okay, in order you have to come up with a certain population of choosing the majority and the minority. So Beis Hillel had within this larger population, we were the majority. But if you had a smaller population of ones who were considered to be smarter, you had a majority of Beit Shammai, and that was the machlokas between Beit Shammai and Beis Hillel. They both knew you had to go after the majority. The question was, how do you determine the majority of what population? Anyway, so what you have, we had this argument. So the question comes out, and then what you have is a Baskol came out and said, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim, they both represent the word of God, but halacha Beis Hillel. Now, that aspect that the Baskol came out and said the laws like Beis Hillel, there was a voice from heaven that came out, laws like Beis Hillel. So the fact is that leads to a whole discussion. Basically, Tosfos right there asked the question, because another famous Gemara where you're not supposed to listen to a Baskol.
What is that?
A voice from heaven. A voice from heaven has no...
Bat kol.
Bat kol. Thank you. A bat kol. Okay, so a voice from heaven. What?
Who heard it? Everybody heard it.
Whoever heard it.
Isn't it bat kol like kol isha?
No, the
Bat
point...
kol is feminine.
The point is...
No, it's a good question.
What?
Who heard it is a good question.
The rabbis. It was whatever
So
bat
the
kol
rabbis
means.
were sitting there and two regular lay people, they wouldn't...
I don't know if they would hear it or not, but the point is a significant population heard it. The people who were involved in the dispute heard it, the people who made the decision heard it, but the bat kol generally has no standing in Jewish law. If God would come out and say the law is like this, we'd sit there and say, I'm sorry, God, but according to your rules, right, right.
But still, it would be nice if we had it.
Yeah, but we're not allowed to rely upon it. But the fact is that this is a case, and then you have a whole issue of why Tosfos asked the question, why was this case? Okay, but it
So
came
we don't
out
go by
of
bat kol anyway.
But then the Gemara goes further.
But the Bat Kol has
No authority, then-
credibility.
What's the value?
After Sinai.
So why would the...
Oh, so that's another question. So why did the bat kol come up? That's another question. But the point is that what happens is then the Gemara says something interesting. Yes, the law came out like Beis Hillel, but aside from the Baskol, okay, the Gemara asks a question, or basically says, why was the law established like Beis Hillel? Because they presented their material they presented their arguments in a respectful and thoughtful manner, and so forth, and they always dealt with the words of Beis Shammai. They always treated with the words, and not only that, they actually always preceded their words to the words of Beit Shammai. So in other words, whenever they stated their opinion, they'd say, okay, Beit Shammai's made this opinion. Okay, now we disagree with them, but now we're going to explain why we disagree with them. This is their argument, our argument, and so forth and so forth.
Wasn't it like Beit Shammai was Gvura and Beit Hillel was Chesed?
That's something that is not in the text. There's a lot of things that come out from let's say Kabbalistic thought. Okay, Beis Hillel being more chesed, Beis Shammai being more gvura. That's why in the time of or Beis Shammai being more din, chesed. That's why in the time of Mashiach, they say you're going to follow the law like Beis Shammai. The truth is, as I pointed out to someone, everyone likes to state that idea. Go find me a source that says in the time of the Mashiach, the law is going to follow Beis Shammai. Go find me that source.
What do you mean?
Go find me that source.
So how do we know that? Well, everyone seems to know
Everyone,
that
it's
story.
yeah, but don't find me the source. You won't find it in the Talmud. Okay?
Will you find it on the internet?
I'm sure if you find it,
You'll find out at least Goldstein's.
okay. The fact is that when you start explaining things Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, it's nice explanations for their attitudes, but that has no standing in terms of trying to explain the mechanics of Jewish law. The fact that we follow Beis Shammai or Beis Hillel, the point is, why do we follow them? So there might be that there might be an argument in this world, and so forth, that's only after the law is determined. The Gemara is giving the reason. Now, it might be that Beis Hillel, but the Gemara's reason is that Beis Hillel is followed because they quoted Beis Shammai first. That's a legal that's a principle in terms of legal analysis. Okay? The fact that they have Gevura, or the fact that Beis Shammai represented Gevura and Beis Hillel represented Chesed, are ideas that we pull out in terms of subsequent philosophical analysis or Kabbalistic analysis of what they represent.
So what's Gevura?
Gevura is strength. The argument, like for Avram
more strictness.
Avram Avinu represented Chesed, Yitzchak Avinu represented Gevura. Gvura is a little bit more strict. You know, there's a classic answer. I heard it from, I forget, I heard it in the name of a Hasidic Rebbe. It says at Nashim Shirasa Bucharon. It talks about Avram when he came up to Eretz Yisrael, he came up with this multitude of individuals who he was mekarev to belief in one God or whatever. All these people and so forth. So you had all these people who were Noachites, right? Okay, so the question exists: what happened to all these people, right? But by the time, you know, it seems that in Yitzchak Yaakov, he didn't have a lot of people. Yitzchak traveled down to Plishim. He wasn't carrying a lot of people with him. So there was one Hasidic Rebbe who answered because Yitzchak turned him off. Why? Because Avram was a Chesed, so he was welcoming and warm and so forth and so forth. Yitzchak was Gvura, much more strict, much more, you know, demanding and so forth and so forth. And the fact is that he and now there's a person who said, there's one person who explained it like this, and I like the way he explained it, is that because Avram, his personality was Chesed. He really tried to, but one of the things that makes someone really uncomfortable is a person who doesn't have that personality, who tries to have that personality. As I want to be warm and welcoming and so forth and so forth. And I can speak as a rabbi like this, is that there's certain rabbis who are remarkable pastors. They're unbelievable in visiting the sick. But I can tell you from visiting the sick, because I'm not sick, I'm not one of those people, there's nothing that gets a sick person more upset than a rabbi trying to be nice when he's visiting. Okay, because it's just not natural. Yeah. So the truth is that so there's one person who explained it like that. Anyways, let's go back to this point. The point is,
there are exceptions, right? We don't always go like that.
No, we don't always go like Beis Hillel, but generally we go like Beis Hillel, but there are a few exceptions with Beis Shammai. So the point is, the Gemara says, because we quote Beis Shammai first. Now, what does this mean? We quote Beis Shammai first. What is the remarkable aspect of quoting Beis Shammai first? Completely changes the nature of the law.
Like the
There's two things going on.
Yeah.
Number one is Hillel showing respect for another rabbi, but there's a second thing going on as well, and that is that Hillel, from an analytical point of view, he is not merely stating his position, he is comparing his position against another position, which is a much more complicated thing to do.
Right.
So when you're saying that, when somebody at some point said that, you know, Shammai was the more intellectual of the two, that may not necessarily be so, because if Shammai didn't quote Hillel first, we don't have a body of comparison
like point
done by
You're asking.
Shammai.
You have no way of knowing if that's true. So I'm stating a fact. I'm stating a fact.
Yeah.
that the people at that time recognized that this was not belief,
Yeah.
because belief is recognize that these individuals were basically the more intellectual individuals, and so forth and so forth. Not every one of them, but that was it.
But what does that mean in the absence of that comparative analysis?
The fact, excuse me, because obviously there was some comparative analysis. See, the point is,
problem.
what?
When you talk about intellect, I get lost. What do you mean intellect? How can you say someone has more intellect than the other?
I'm sure Hillel had intellect.
Okay,
No, what's the standard of measurement that they're using for that?
Exactly what it is.
Yeah.
IQ. Let's say IQ is the standard of measurement.
And the Shammai's IQ.
That would be the simple way of understanding it. That
If a rabbi connect directly to neshama, not to IQ, because the way I understand is those rabbi was not exactly IQ. They were more connecting to a spiritual being. If they could hear but call, then they were not really operating 100% on intellect.
Are you saying that they belonged to a higher plane?
No, I'm saying
they were still here on earth. They still dealt with earthly things.
They have a different neshama, and the same thing about Moses. They're different type of souls.
You have different type of soul, but you have no way of
like
proving
people related to Aaron. People related to Aaron better.
But you're governing over people with ideas of spirituality. But people
Moses didn't govern; he was a deliverer of information.
Yes, but the people have to be able to handle this information, and I think the Beit Hillel did a better related to people in a different.
It's a problem for me to say someone has more intellect.
I don't argue that.
It may be a specific kind of intellect, and that information has been
Like
lost over the years.
if you compare the Gaon Mivilna compared to Baal Shem Tov, who has more intellect?
Well, exactly. It may be there are different kinds of intelligence. There's different kinds of intellect, what kind it is probably been lost.
But we're splitting hairs here and getting away from
you're talking about a qualitatively different aspect. This is the point is what Reuven's referring to is how does someone become able to make a decision? How does someone become a rabbi? In the Hasidic world, which also would seem to flow from the Kabbalistic idea, it is much more guided by some level of what you would call spirituality. Okay? Even if it's not a level of prophecy, but there's some level of what you would call Ruach HaKodesh, some level of spirituality, and so forth. In the Misnagid world, or the classical understanding, it is the decisions are a product of intellectual thought. So when you ask the question about the Baal Shem Tov and the Vilna Gaon, you get two different answers. In the Misnagid world, they would sit there and say, of course the Vilna Gaon was a greater genius than the Baal Shem Tov. Well, you think the Baal Shem Tov was a greater genius? And they would argue, if you're saying you're following the Baal Shem Tov, you're saying the Baal Shem Tov is a greater genius than the Vilna Gaon. I disagree with you on that level. If you're arguing from a Hasidic viewpoint, you would sit there and argue that the Baal Shem Tov had more of this spiritual insight than the Vilna Gaon. And that is what made him the more powerful figure. Misnagim, most likely, you might hear someone say, yeah, maybe the Baal Shem Tov had a little bit more of that spiritual feeling or whatever it is, but the Vilna Gaon triumphs because he was a bigger genius. And then another person sit there and say, well, so I agree the Vilna Gaon was a bigger genius, but the Baal Shem Tov should triumph because he had more of that spiritual
What are we
perspective.
talking about? With Beit Shammai Ben Hillel, we're talking about chassid. Is that what we're not doing this not getting chassid?
We're doing any aspect of making decisions in Jewish law.
Okay,
The
so
fact
that's
is
very
that your argument is one of intelligence. It's an aspect that the process of determining Jewish law and Jewish thought is a product of your mind. It's the exact same intellectual process. According to Misnagdim, yes. According to understanding the
Even Mitnagdim, even a person is still influenced by his personality.
Yeah, that's we're going to get to that.
It's not intellect.
No. Excuse me. We'll get to that. The fact of the matter is what you're beginning to understand is the role of the intellect. But the intellect in Judaism, and this is something I want to get to, is the intellect in Jewish thought is an aspect of personality, and therefore there's a relative aspect to truth within Torah. Not as relative as you have in the world, but the opening statement of the statement Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chaim is here you have two opposite views on the law, and they're both considered to be the will of God. Now this gets into issues of faith and intellect. See, this really comes into do you believe in God or do you have an intellectual understanding of God? So then the truth of the matter is there may not be one answer or another answer. The point is the Rambam would sit there most likely and argue that it's the intellectual recognition that God exists that is more important. The Chassid, or someone who, let's say, follows Yehuda Halevi, and you're not talking about someone who himself, you're talking about someone who himself was a great intellect also, would sit there and say that there's an aspect of some kind of recognition, some spiritual recognition of faith. In other words, the Yehuda Halevi, when he argues that knowledge of God basically is a product of the neshama having experience of God, okay, or experiencing God, it's actually a sense. I know God exists because I sense Him through my neshama. It's Yehuda Halevi. Lubavitch talks about that in terms of Yiddish and neshama. Okay, in terms of Yiddish and neshama being able, you already know God. If you look in terms of Chabad practice, the reason they try and get people to do mitzvot is because you already have the knowledge or the recognition of God's existence within you, but something is blocking it, and therefore through doing mitzvahs you remove what blocks it, and therefore you allow you to actually feel it. But it's an aspect of what you would call faith. It's not an intellectual argument. It is actually a sense of my neshama. The intellectual argument is an intellectual argument. Now, the intellectual argument then runs in, so how it's the idea that I intellectually come to this conclusion. Now, the truth is, you see this also in the Machlokas about Avraham Avinu. When did Avraham Avinu, know about God?
52 years old. Or 3, you're going to say?
One of the answers wasn't 52. There were two other answers. There are two answers. So there's a medrash that says he was 3. The Rambam says he was 40. Okay? Now the point is what's that machlokes based on? They both have their arguments. The Rambam didn't just came up with this idea. The fact is, if you say it was 3, how did Avram come to a realization about God?
He had this special neshama.
He had a neshama. Therefore, it wasn't any real beginning. It was just the product of his own being. Then why is he great? Why? So what?
But he went against everybody.
Yeah, but he had this inherent knowledge. What do you want him to do?
But he's still a person that has to.
So why is anyone great?
He still lives in the
We all
world.
get to what we
Yeah,
get
but
from
still, this knowledge. So the point is, according to the Rambam, the Avram's greatness is that he worked it out. He actually says maybe it started at 3. He started having inklings about this, but he worked it out. And his greatness is at 40 is when he finally came to the intellectual conclusion that there is a God. And that was his greatness. The truth of the matter is that the greatness of Ram is not just simply that he discovered God. Okay, there's two aspects of Ram. People think he was the first monotheist. Ram was not the first monotheist. There were monotheists in his time, right? Shemoneh-esrei lived at the same time as Avram. There were other monotheists around. Melchizedek, who the Medrash says was Shem. Okay, there were a lot of people who were monotheists. The only thing is their monotheism came from their tradition. They were taught to be monotheists. Avram was the first Baal Tshuva. He came to, okay, then the question is how did he come to it? So the point
they were
is...
taught to be monotheists. Who taught them?
Their parents. From Noah. What do you think Shem got the idea of being a monotheist?
Okay.
Gee whiz, there's a flood happening here. God, okay, all the people are dead. I'm coming off this ark. Gee whiz, okay, and my father just spoke to God. Gee, is there a God or not? I don't know. He knew there was a God.
Son
right?
was from the same family. Son was on the same ark, so you can't
Yeah,
know.
so the point is that's why you get into issues. If you notice, in history, what does secular history try to do? Secular history tries to show how monotheism developed from idolatry, right? So the great move of secular historians is how the Jews came to this idea of monotheism through the years, and they were like this, and so that's what secular historians do. What do we try and do? What do? We try to figure out how idolatry came about. That's the Rambam's famous argument. Right. In the time of Enosh, they started having, what do you mean? They went through the flood. They didn't know there was one God. So how did they develop idolatry? So the big issue is how they became idolaters. So they have a whole argument they became idolaters in a process. First they thought it was proper to serve the other forces and so forth. Enosh is it's not right that we don't give sacrifices to the moon, because the moon is like an angel and so forth and so forth. It's the same way as in Canada. Right, when the Governor General comes, you treat him with respect. Why? Because he's a representative of the Queen. So therefore,
Hillel and Shammai.
I'm going back. So the point is, it deals with this issue. Is when a person's decision is made in Jewish law, is it made because of I have a feeling it's right? I'm not trying to play this down, or a spiritual understanding that it's right, or is it an intellectual process?
You just said that Enosh did the same thing as Abraham. They went from A to B to C. They thought they would be in line.
No, Enosh was the exact opposite. Enosh was the exact opposite. He made a mistake.
He made a mistake, but he did the same. It was the same.
So the fact is that's why the truth is that he went through the process that it was proper to serve the representatives of God, and therefore you have to sit there and say, how do you know when you're culpable for your mistake or not culpable for your mistake? That's why one of the things within Judaism is the concept of Tinuk Shenishba. It's a very interesting concept in Judaism, because every other religion doesn't just say you got to believe. It says, what happens to someone who doesn't believe? If I don't believe in Jesus, what happens to me? According to an evangelical Christian,
You're going to be punished.
you're going to be punished. If I was talking to a fundamentalist Muslim, if I don't believe, what happens to me?
He kills you.
Right, it kills you. The fact of the matter is you're going straight down. In Judaism, if you don't believe in Torah Sinai, or you get it wrong, what happens?
You don't go straight
What?
down.
No, you don't.
You get
Absolutely
credit for
not.
what
You
you
have
do.
zillions of chances to repent.
No, the fact of the matter is that's a determination by God to figure out your culpability for your mistakes. But your mistakes, how can anyone else decide them? And the truth is that's one of the bases of the Jewish concept of freedom of religion. If you look at freedom of religion, what did Jews do when non-Jews started treating Jews very favorably? After in the 1700s and so forth and so on. When Christians, you had what's his name, Reichlin, who basically saved Reichlin, the guy who saved the Talmud in Germany. He was a good friend of the Ramah. That's actually in the 1600s, I believe. The fact of the matter is, in 1500s, 1600s, but when Reichlin came out to defense of Jews and the Talmud and so forth and so forth, he was a devout Christian. He believes in Jesus. But he said, no, the Jews are this and so forth and so on. Now, why he still looked positive on the Jews, that's his own figuring out his religion. I don't know.
You need Jews anyway.
Yeah, whatever. The
Or
point
at
of
least
that
a
is,
small
Reichlin is considered one of the Tzaddikim, really a Tzaddikim Olam, even though he still followed Jesus. What happened? So you started having rabbis who basically said, you started having attitude, well, Christianity, it's not really total idolatry, it's not really that bad. But really what it reflected is people were struggling with ideas. And in a world where the ideas are not absolutely clear, right, you can't be held culpable 100%. If you believe something like faith, where you already know, if you ever talk to an evangelical Christian, I already know, right? You already know. You ever talk to an evangelical Christian? They'll sit there and say, come on, you really know the truth. No, I really don't believe it. No, you really do. Right? No, come on, you really know. Come on, just go there by yourself. Just close your eyes for a second. You really feel Jesus. Right? No. Oh, you're fighting it. You're fighting it. Satan's holding you back. Okay, and that's why you're being put, because you really know you're wrong. But in Jewish thought, there's a respect for intellect. And therefore, if you are making a mistake out of intellect, you get into concepts of tinik shenishba, not being held responsible. Tinik shenishba, it's a captured child. Tinok shenishba.
Not nishba like a shvu, not a.
I can't understand
Right.
at all.
Nishba shevi is in captivity. It's not nishba like the swear. Or a shvua. It's nishba with a shevi like captivity.
The point is, it's that a child who was taken by adultery.
Now you understand.
Okay, so the point is that becomes an intellectual idea.
But
So
no
this
one's
goes
doubting that Hillel and Shammai. I want to get back. I want to keep you on course.
So
Hillel
the
and Shammai,
point.
they're both intellectual. We're not questioning that.
So the point is.
So what's the fundamental difference in their approach?
So the point is Beit Hillel, okay, is praised for absolutely always basically quoting Beit Shammai first.
We said
Now,
that okay.
So what does that say? What does that say?
They may agree with
That's
the other
true.
person's point.
But what does it say
It says
about
Elu be'elu, but I'm sure Shammai would also
Wait.
say that.
There's a fundamental question that one has to ask. Did Shammai quote Hillel first?
Well, it would seem, as Howard's pointing out, that they didn't treat them in the same way Beit Hillel. That's why Beit Hillel obviously did something more worthwhile and so forth.
Okay, so
But Beit
that's the
Shammai,
presumption.
obviously understood differing opinions and dealt with
Okay, so
differing
then
opinions.
that's not.
Okay.
So we have to
point-
ask
but-
the
but-
variable.
They allowed
But there was something
marriage
unique.
between.
Yes, so there was something unique about Beit Hillel's viewpoint, which even further stressed this idea, and that's what I want to get to. Whatever that idea is, the point is, it really tells you something about knowledge. Okay. See.
Can I throw in a third
Yeah.
aspect? So aside from the respect, and aside from the comparative analysis that Hillel was given, compared to what Shammai would say, there's a third aspect, and that is that if we have access to the analysis that Hillel has done, but we don't have access to the analysis that Shammai had done, then the only way we can build a halacha is based on Hillel, because we have his mechanics, but we don't have Shammai's mechanics.
That's wrong. We do have the access of Shammai. We know Shammai. Yes, pick the example of Hanukkah. We know what's behind
We know what
it.
Shammai had. We had that information. The
Okay,
point
so that's
is,
not it. Okay,
the point is, the information was there. But the fact is that Hillel made it a point of dealing with Shammai's position. It's like this. It's in our world today. Okay. I'll pick on Chabad for example. Okay. There are many people who are very, very upset with the Tefillin campaign. The Rebbe supported the Tefillin campaign, was very adamant about it, and so forth. There were other rabbis
What the mitzvah, like
to go around and go and put on Tefillin. Other rabbis were very, who felt that it was really wrong to do this. Now, you know something? Because the truth is,
No, it's too far.
I don't want to deal with the specifics.
Okay.
I don't want to tell the reasons.
Take
Okay.
what's on the table.
Okay. Now the point. Okay. The first is that I would go up to a Chabadnik and they'll tell you, well, it's tefillin. So I just told you one of the reasons of Chabad did tefillin, because they felt that doing a mitzvah would remove the klippas that protect you from getting a knowledge of God. So why were these other people against putting on tefillin? Okay? Not only that, they basically pointed out that you were really doing an avera. You were getting people to do an avera by doing it. So basically,
Is that embarrassing?
forget embarrassing. Why? The fact is that they were putting on tefillin because people don't recognize. Let me ask you something. The command of putting on tefillin, if you're really truly following the full command of putting on tefillin, when would you be wearing tefillin?
In the morning.
All day.
All
All
day.
day, yeah.
All day. When did Jews stop wearing tefillin all day?
16th century?
No.
After
The
the
Inquisition?
destruction
way back.
The Inquisition.
of the temple.
During the time of the Gaonim. Now, why did Jews stop wearing tefillin? Why did Jews stop wearing tefillin? And how did it get to be that you wear tefillin during chakras? Because the fact is, and why is it that women take on a lot of mitzvahs, right? Like a lot of women will do certain mitzvahs, but how many women do you know take on the mitzvah tefillin?
Only
Rashi's granddaughter.
Well, no, there were a few more people who said Rashi's granddaughters or Rashi's daughters and so forth. But the truth of the matter is generally like the Ramah states, right? This is a mitzvah women should not take on. Okay, it's a Ramah. There are Sephardic women who do it.
Like that?
No, the fact of the matter is because the demands made upon an individual when they have tefillin on are so onerous and so demanding that the greater chances once you put tefillin on that you are going to do an avera while you're wearing the tefillin, because you'll have a stray thought that you're not supposed to have when you have tefillin on. You'll pass wind. You'll do something. So the truth of the matter is, at the time of the Gaonim, greater people than us came up with the idea: I'm not putting on tefillin because I don't want to take a chance of doing an avera.
That's why some people justify living in Galut. They say,
whatever. Because I don't want to take. The truth of the matter is, and that's what was happening. Okay, we're not going to put on tefillin because by putting on tefillin, I increase my chances of doing something wrong. Better not to put on tefillin, and a lot of people agreed with that argument. Then
not to put on tefillin at all, not to wear tefillin all day.
Not to wear tefillin at all.
So you can do that for every mitzvah. What do you mean?
No, because the fact is, there's a greater chance. So therefore, the rabbis at the time came up with the idea that rather than not putting tefillin at all, let's figure out there's a time in the day where you could take the chance better.
Yeah.
And they came up with the idea, let's just put on tefillin for chakras, because there's a greater chance that you'll put on tefillin correctly during chakras, and that's what developed.
So why don't you put it in Chagim?
Okay, what?
Why don't you put it in
Because you don't put it on the Chagim. That's the Raisa. Because you can't wear tefillin on the Chagim.
Why?
Because tefillin is an oath, and you don't need the
The
sign
holiday itself is
Why?
fulfilling that purpose.
sign itself is an
In
oath.
that direction, why just choose shacharit versus shacharit mincha mar?
The point is that that's part of the question. They just said, listen, we just want to get that mitzvah in, and because the concern of not wearing tefillin,
They didn't want to lose the whole
right?
concept of tefillin.
But the fact is the general idea that you should be careful when you wear tefillin should be on your mind. So the truth of the matter is, you'll see today that there's certain rabbis.
Better with mincha then, because it's a lot shorter and I
Okay,
don't talk as much.
but the point is that okay. So the point is, and by the way, that might be a concern, but the fact is, chakra is considered to be the time they have the most focus.
The problem is that tefillin has the name of God written inside.
Yeah.
And it doesn't. You cannot mix with general world like if you.
That was the objection. Yeah.
Yeah, because it is. But
No.
it's exactly the same way. If you put the tefillin, it can awaken you.
That's right. It's the opposite. Why do you wear tzitzit? So it'll be a reminder that you won't come to
The point of the matter is the onerous concentration you have to have when you're putting on tefillin in terms of your thoughts. If you recognize the seriousness of when you wear tefillin, okay?
You're not talking during the davening. I mean,
Forget that. No. In terms of what goes in your mind. You think Hollywood? You just ruined the whole mitzvah. Who says you're allowed to think about Hollywood? Who says you're allowed to think about Trump? Who says you're allowed to think about Israel? Do you know the rules of tefillin in terms of what you're allowed to think about? The strictness of having tefillin on your head, and how onerous is that restriction on your head?
Now you're talking about kavanah.
No, it's more. It's an aspect of kavanah, but not the kavanah that you're thinking about. It's an aspect of you have to be in a certain state of mind, and we're not thinking about kavanah in terms of doing the mitzvah. We're thinking about a certain onerous idea of what you're thinking about. So the problem existed. The other side of the argument was
If a man's afraid before he puts on tefillin, you would be afraid.
Yes, absolutely, and that's where you should be.
He decides he can't put it on.
Then that might be a proper decision in that situation.
Yeah, no, if somebody's putting on tefillin on a street corner, it's full of distractions, etc., etc.
And that was the argument. The argument was that people is by going around and doing tefillin in such a place. Beside the fact that it's
very simple, because today is not what used to be 200 years ago.
I feel it, but
What?
even
200
200 years ago as a shepherd,
today-
how could you do your job
today-
as a shepherd with
today-
it?
Right.
Any
Right.
second you are bombarded. Any second.
But the fact is is the onerous application of what it means to be wearing tefillin. That's why women don't put on tefillin. People think it's all these other reasons. The fact of the matter is saying, listen, you don't have an obligation of you don't have an obligation to wear tefillin. So why put yourself in a situation where you may slip up and have an avera, because wearing tefillin is a very serious thing.
But you can do that with any mitzvah. People say, "Oh, maybe I shouldn't do it. Then I should."
Yes, you can do whatever you mitzvah.
Then you try to do anything.
If
I shouldn't daven because I know I'm going to talk. I know lashon hara, so I'm not going to open my mouth.
Excuse me. The fact of the matter is that there's an idea of recognizing the consequences and so forth and so forth. This is what happens with tefillin.
And so does that develop your Shammai?
It might, but the point is that that's why tefillin was left out to chakras. Now the truth is this leads to an idea where what I'm trying to point out is that the reason I talked about this is that was the argument with the Rebbe, going on and putting on tefillin to someone who's not even Orthodox. He's putting on tefillin, like for example, I give this example. Leonard Nimoy put out a book. You know Leonard Nimoy's book on tefillin? Okay. Leonard Nimoy, right? Leonard Nimoy was a big supporter of Chabad. He's a big supporter of Chabad. Suppose they gave $1 million to Chabad of California before he published this book. After that, he didn't have too much to do with Chabad. He put out a book reflecting spirituality. Okay, the spirituality was naked women, because the spirituality of the feminine with tefillin. It was a book. It was a big picture. Okay, he developed this idea of spirituality. There's a spirituality in the feminine form, then there's a spirituality in tefillin.
So the women should wear tefillin? I don't know. What did he say?
He did something that would be totally unacceptable.
What did he do?
He put out a book with naked women wearing tefillin.
Okay, he didn't say that. That's what you're talking about.
Okay, in terms of some spirituality, the point of the matter is, he thought he was doing something spiritual. The point is that from our perspective, that was designed to the tefillin and totally missed with tefillin, because you're not supposed to be thinking about those things when you're wearing tefillin.
No, but that's what I mean. We're talking about two schools.
So the point is,
on topic.
I am.
Two schools. I'm talking about two. Why do we go by Shammai more than Hillel? So you've said already.
The point is what am I saying? What I'm saying to you is, I was giving you. What was I giving you an example of? I was giving you an example of a disagreement.
Fine.
Okay, disagreement. How many people know both sides of a disagreement? Okay?
On Hillel and Shammai's level, they do. We're talking about that level. We're not talking about commoners.
Okay, the fact is, in our world today, okay, generally, people don't know agreement. So therefore, if you want to, let's say, argue for Israel, okay, what does it mean? If you want to argue pro-Israel, you should start your discussion with respect and acceptance of the opinion of the Satmar Rav. Right. And if you're a Satmar Chassid, you should begin your discussion with the recognition of the acceptance of the opinion of Rav Kook. Now, what does that mean? It doesn't mean you agree, because by definition you disagree. But once you respect that position, once you accept that position, you accept it as a legitimate position. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. There are two ideas of how we make decisions. How do we make decisions? One way of making decisions is through the intellectual perception of right and wrong. Okay? I do a mathematical thing. I put out the mathematics, so forth and so forth. I show that what you're saying is intellectually wrong. Come to that conclusion. Nice and simple. You have no argument against that. Every time you see a position presented in the Gemara as an acceptable position, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, okay, Rav and Shmuel, Rabbi Abaya, every position is intellectually, logically consistent. Absolutely so. And Howard would tell you he went through Gemara sometime and he found that there were a lot of that the arguments were basically logical. The fact of the matter is when you read through a Gemara and you see a Gemara saying Tiyufta, okay, we proved it wrong. Basically what happens is one way of having an argument is by showing that the conclusion the argument is illogical and contradicts the intellectual conclusion. Then comes the second way you make decisions. How do you make decisions? Well, with Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, what Beis Hillel is basically saying is, for every decision of Beis Shammai, we recognize that they are logically consistent. It totally meshes with the analysis of the verses. It is a totally consistent system. It meets the criteria.
Who's saying this? Hillel on Shammai.
Hillel saying that. Shammai.
I think Shammai said it on Hillel
I think
too.
they said on Hillel
Okay,
too.
so
But the point is, that was the big thing of what Hillel did. When they said that they presented the Shammai, they proved how every argument from Beis Shammai was totally logically consistent. Then, how did you make the decision between two positions? You couldn't say you're absolutely right, because your absoluteness of that rightness is based upon logical intellectual analysis, and that position that you're in disagreement with is totally equally logical and consistent. So how is it that your opinion is that you chose your opinion? So it's a concept that is referred to as shikul hadat, the weighing of thought. Okay.
Is that till you just pronounce it properly? No.
Shikul hadas. Okay. Anyways, the point of the matter is at that juncture in time, an individual has, this is where you're getting into personality, an individual has a sense of saying, I think this opinion is more correct than the other opinion. Not I think this opinion is 100% wrong and that one's 100% right and that one's 100% wrong. It's I understand that both opinions totally explain the sources and are consistent and logically withstand any attack, but the bottom line is I'm left with having to choose. Now, what are the criteria for having to choose? I had a Rosh Yeshiva of mine who argued that basically it's a reflection of your past learning. You have a certain perception of Torah from the Torah that you started learning with. So if your learning was a certain type of derech, that's always going to affect you in terms of your shikul hadat. Okay? Or it's an aspect of your personality. That's what you're talking about in terms of chesed and gvura. It's an aspect of of something inside your being. The point is that what Judaism is then saying is that, this is what I was saying before in the aspect of relative truth, is the fact is that Torah is not absolute 100% logically presented as totally consistent. Okay? God gave over the ability for human beings to think and analyze. And with the ability for human beings to think and analyze, they have to come up with the recognition of divergent opinions and the recognition of different ideas and so forth. Now, this actually leads to the idea of questions and the ideas of how you know. If you're absolutely sure about what you know, what is it based upon? The truth is there's very, very little that we can say absolutely sure that it's absolutely true based on logical analysis. The fact that God wants human beings thinking, which is the very evidence from Torah, and wants human beings coming up with different perspectives, yields the idea that you have to recognize divergence of opinions. Once you recognize divergence of opinions, and that shikul hadat that says, I'm following this opinion, is no longer an absolute statement that this is right. It's an absolute statement that I accept that opinion. To me, it makes most sense. But I can now respect Elu ve'elu, that to another rabbi, that would make more sense.
So that's what I'm asking. If Hillel and Shammai, if the schools of Hillel and Shammai were both intellectually sound, and both had respect, and both of them were Elu ve'elu, would agree to that. So then how did it come next step? Is it only because he gave? And
so the point is
that we go by Hillel. That's what the
I understand. So the Gemara. So it seems to be that Beit Hillel was an extreme in this idea.
An extreme in what idea?
In the idea, acknowledging the other side. Not Elu ve'elu. They always are. Everyone respected Elu. You see from the Gemara where Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel worked together when they had halachic disagreements. But it would seem to be that when that Beit Hillel was very adamant about presenting the opinion of Beit Shammai and absolutely explaining it, and also further explaining how it understood the argument. So when Beit Shammai would come up with an argument, Beit Hillel would sit there and say, yeah, that's their argument, so forth and so forth. This is how I understand the verses. This is how I understand the argument. So I can show you that argument does not challenge my opinion, but I have a way of explaining that opinion while still respecting the other opinion. But it seems to be that while Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai did have some mutual respect, Hillel Shammai had mutual respect, they all had mutual respect. The point is Beit Hillel made it very much part of their learning process. That I want. It's like what I said before about, let's say, Rav Kook and the Satmar Rav, right? Halavai, we lived in a world where everyone knew how to quote the other Prav. The point is that what we're saying is that they had a world where they recognized the other opinions because there was mutual respect. But Beit Hillel was more adamant about clarifying that we always have to quote Beit Shammai.
Do we have any source for knowing why?
Knowing why?
Why they chose to do that? Why Beit Hillel?
Okay, so that's what I'm really speaking about. Is that what my understanding is what they're telling you is the nature of Jewish thought. Like I mentioned this morning, for example, when Moshe Feinstein talks about a halachic decision, he says, I don't know if I'm right kalpei shmaya, right? In his introduction to Igros Moshe, which is his response to literature, he says, I can't tell you 100% that this is exactly the right halachic decision, especially if he's in disagreement with other rabbis. Okay? No, I don't know. What he can say is this is what I think is correct. Now that tells you something about his understanding of faith and knowledge.
And his, he can say because he believes his process is sound.
It's totally because it's based on the process of sound. He doesn't say everyone can say this is because he's and he has the knowledge to make this kind of decision. But the fact is, it's an aspect of anything we have to do in terms of knowledge and belief. The point is that anyone who walks around saying I believe, like 100%, right? I watch this argument. I said to say, okay, give me the arguments against your belief. The point is anyone who can't do that basically is just relying upon some emotional perception that I'm 100% right and everyone else be damned.
Again,
or everyone else is an idiot.
But Shammai and Hillel, we're talking about Shammai and Hillel.
Right,
so they're both right. So I'm trying. My understanding till now was always that the reason we go by Hillel, not because they're equal so far as everything we said, is because Tircha Tzibur more, or maybe I'm using the wrong expression, that Shammai is more strict or stringent or gvur or whatever, and that's why the majority has to go by. That has nothing to do with the Hillel.
That's not what this Gemara is saying.
So what is this Gemara saying? Just because they, what are they saying?
What is it saying? It's giving you a perception of knowledge. They're basically, and that's what I'm trying to explain. The way I'm trying to explain it is by understanding what happens when we don't apply that knowledge. When you walk around thinking that you're absolutely correct.
But Shammai didn't think that he was absolutely correct.
I'm not talking about
I'm talking about in the context of Shammai and Hillel. I want to know why we go by Hillel. If they're both equal and respectful for each other, and they both know that they Belu, what is? I'm trying to isolate the variable. What?
Rabbi's saying that Hillel was more respectful. You said that. You said he seemed to. In
other words, they presented this value in a much more stronger way. Shammai
and they got rewarded for that, and that's why we go by Hillel. Who rewarded them? Was there a panel? Or
that's why the Bas Kol came out and said we're following.
You said we don't go by the Bas Kol.
I said, what did I say?
You said we don't go by a Bas Kol. That's what you said.
I said that.
I'm holding my count. It's good. This is Gemara. This is good.
The point is a Bas Kol came, even though we don't.
No, the problem is we do. The point is...
Wait, I didn't get that far. Yes, I'm actually aware that we do. I don't know how I'm aware, but I am aware. The point is, though, that the... Call it derech eretz, call it respect, call it whatever you want. The point is that Hillel enlarged the perspective more than Shammai did, and in my understanding of what we're discussing.
Is this what the Gemara says? Is this your opinion? How about all the other people that you mentioned?
Hang on.
There were always two schools. The whole Gemara is based on machloket. So how do we decide? Forget Hillel and Shammai.
It's yes and.
1 second. We said in the other one, Rabbi and Shmuel. And the proof is that we don't always go by Hillel. So there are so many exceptions. So what are we talking about even?
Okay.
And how did they decide in the other examples? How did they decide?
In examining the reason why...
I bet you it's no embarrassment to say if you don't know, then say you don't know.
In examining the reason why
Why we
we'll
says
go by
everything that
Hillel
wonderful
as opposed to
piece.
Shammai,
Okay.
typically,
Right.
a certain value emerges
Right.
from that, and that's the value.
Let me try and define this, okay? I'm not explaining every situation why we follow this person versus that person. The truth of the matter is, there are
Why can't you look at me and say, Joyce?
there are halachic svarim that
You're
tell
also
you
asking
there's
questions.
You in tefillin.
halachic arguments. There's halachic arguments.
never been approached
Machukas
by
Rabbi Akiva and a colleague we follow like Rabbi Akiva. Why? Because we follow whatever. There's this reason. There's that reason. And so forth and so forth. I'm not dealing with that. That's not the issue here.
So what do you do?
The issue here is not specifically why we follow Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai.
I thought that was
Okay,
the topic.
excuse me. The point was, is that the Gemara is
Benji, look at Alan.
okay. The
No,
Gemara.
you're pointing on purpose. That's a compliment. No, because isn't that what is the topic? Just tell me what the topic is. No, I want to know.
finish the
I
sentence.
was like, understand. Let's go around the table.
Almost
That
there.
was the topic.
He
Well,
was
it takes
almost
two.
there.
I don't want to spend 2 hours. You said the topic was why Hillel over
That's
Shammai.
not the topic.
So what is the topic? Ask anyone around the table what the topic is. What's
The topic
What
was
is the purpose of quoting Shammai first?
what is the value?
Value,
The
sorry,
value.
value, not purpose.
What's
What
the
is-
value of quoting
Beit Shammai first.
that? Okay, what's the
Right here,
of quoting-
value of
Value. That
presenting
gives you
Beit Shammai
Gave you a
first.
bus call.
Right. Okay.
The value of quoting
Okay.
Shammai first is
Okay. So what I'm saying is like this. We have a statement, but now the truth is, when I mentioned the thing about the Baskol, I presented in the context that here we have a case where we follow the Baskol, then there's a famous case of Tanur Shalchnai where we didn't follow the Baskol. So there's that creates an
You
issue.
did not understand
That's a
what you said.
Talmudic.
Achnai is a stove. Your accent, I know. I can identify.
There's
Stove?
a
Stove. Achnai, he said.
okay.
Yeah,
Excuse
you don't
me.
know that
No,
word.
Achnai is not
The famous,
stove. It's called Tanur Shalchnai. There's a
Tanur,
famous halach.
Not Tanur.
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 There's a
Okay.
famous discussion about the halacha of Tuma and Tara,
Purity and
of
impurity.
purity concerning this Tanur Shalchnai. And in that case, the bat kol came out and cited like a rabbi, and that position of the rabbi was rejected because we don't listen to bat kols. The point is that then the question is in this case over here we did listen to a bat kol. The point is that there's a whole Talmudic discussion which I'm not entering into. There's a Tosfos right there on that page in the Gemara raises a question: why over there by Tanur Shalchnai we say we don't listen to bat kol, and here we did listen to bat kol? I'm not dealing with that issue. Okay, the point is that we follow the law like Beit Hillel. The Gemara does say that the reason we follow the law of Beit Hillel is because Beit Hillel represented a certain value. Okay, now in that value, Beit Shammai obviously it's not black and white. Beit Shammai also had the value of respecting opinions. There's other Gemaras that clearly show that Beit Shammai also respect, but Beit Hillel went to a certain extreme in this value. And that's what I was saying. So the fact of the matter is therefore, now what is that extreme? So for me to explain that extreme, I'm trying to explain how people deal with disagreements. Okay, so I'm going outside of the case of Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai to show you what's wrong, so you can understand the value that was being argued here. A lot of people, when they have opinions, right? I'm right, you're wrong. So I stated two things. First of all, what kind of argument do you have? So sometimes there's a clear-cut logical argument. Okay? I'm saying that this paper is white. You say this paper is black. Well, look at it. Oh, I'm wrong. So there's certain black and white decisions. I can give you a logical argument using a mathematical argument. Okay? I can sit there and say, if you come to this conclusion, your argument leads to 2 equaling 7. Therefore, your argument is wrong. Okay, I give up. It's a logical argument. Okay, the point is every opinion that you come across in the Gemara, okay, has been checked out in that way. So when you have opinion of Rav and Abaye, you have opinion of Rav and Shmuel. They've already, if it was illogical, if it was going to be, or Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, if it was already intellectually a flawed opinion, it wouldn't make it to that point. Okay. So therefore, what is the other way we make opinions? So the point is given two logical possibilities, to absolutely logical possibilities that totally explain all the issues, okay, which one do you choose? Okay, that's shikul hadat. Okay, it's in that level to understand it. But when you do that kind of analysis based upon that sort of saying, I think I'm right between two logical possibilities, it changes the nature of your thinking, of your thought. Because you're no longer saying, I'm absolutely right. Yeah. What you're saying is, I recognize that these 2, 3, 4 opinions, which pass the muster of being logical possibilities, right? I have to choose between, for various reasons I have to choose between what my behavior is, what my behavior is not going to be like, why I'm doing this, why I'm doing that. They all meet the standard of being logical possibilities, but then I have to make a decision. Now, sometimes, and that's where you get into halachic disagreements. You have different logical possibilities, and that's where you'll see rabbis sitting there and saying, I do this here and I do that there. And basically they'll take in even certain emotional needs. Because there's a logical possibility, I'll apply the lenient opinion because it's appropriate in that position, even though I'll apply a more stringent opinion in another position. The point is that's where you see movement in halacha, where they'll sit there and say, for this reason you can do that, for that reason you can do that. Okay, the point is that it is two logical possibilities, but it changes the nature of your thinking. Because what happens? One sec. Why does it change the nature of your thinking? Because first of all, you're never absolutely sure in terms of the truth if your viewpoint is correct. It's a logical possibility, but I had to make a choice. Is there a possibility I may be wrong? Yes, that's number one. Number two, you did not become adamant in that. Therefore, you have questions. Okay, you basically live with questions, and that's why you see from all the great rabbis that they changed their opinions. The Rambam, from when he wrote the Sefer Mitzvahs till he wrote the Yad Chazaka, constantly we find examples of changing the opinion. Rashi changed his opinions. Right?
Any davar acher is another opinion coming in.
Right.
It doesn't fully satisfy the situation.
And he'll sit there and say, and the Rambam will sit there and say, he wouldn't say, but he passed like this over there in the Sefer Mitzvahs or in his Perush Mishnayos, and then the Yad Chazaka he passes the opposite because his opinion changed. Because he gained more knowledge and so forth. The point of the matter is he was always in, and this comes back to what you say about questioning. The way you're like that is because you're always recognizing that the questioning of yourself is part of the process. Because you're never absolutely sure unless there's only one absolute opinion that maintains a logical possibility. Okay?
And is there such a circumstance?
And is there such a circumstance? Basically, pork is forbidden according to Jewish law. Okay, then go take it from there. Now, Ruben had a question.
Yeah, I have a question. Actually, I want to go to something that I know I heard when I was young. I'm sure everybody heard it. A ger came to Shammai and said, I want to learn Judaism on one leg. He said to him, go away.
Right.
He went to Shammai and he told him, don't do to your neighbor what you don't like to do. Now we go to Hillel. Now we go today. A ger come to Orthodox guy.
Not a ger chassid, a ger.
A ger come to Orthodox serious rabbi. He said, go away. I don't even bother because it's too complicated.
Yeah.
You go to another one that is not so strict. Maybe it's easier. He can convert him in an easier way. So here's an example that we go according to Shammai.
You see,
But is it because of Shammai or just because of
I'm
some other reason?
I'm just telling you what I know. I am not a big learner, but what about the ger?
I don't know that you do go according to Shammai.
Because most of the time, if a ger come to a rabbi and he wants to convert, they don't accept.
First of all, there's a process where there's refusal. Second of all, there's
so it's like Shammai.
It's not necessarily
only
like
superficially
Shammai
and by accident.
okay, can I say something? Can I say something? Okay, and this is, and I want to make it clear. I want to make it clear.
Superficial at all. I don't want you to convert.
The story you have rudimentary facts of the story, but as the story is understood under studying the stories, you don't understand the story. The story of when this ger went to Beit Hillel, went to Shammai and Hillel, is very different than going from one rabbi to another rabbi. The person came with a certain attitude. Okay, the goal of both was I'm going to simplify it. The goal of both was Hillel and Shammai was to turn out a totally Orthodox Jew. Okay, okay. In other words, the end product of Hillel and Shammai were exactly the same.
I believe
Okay.
practicing Orthodox.
Right. Okay. What happened is when that person came to Shammai, okay, Shammai felt that given the person's attitude, the attitude was incorrect. Okay, and therefore he felt that this person could not learn from him anymore, which reflected his knowledge of teaching and so forth and so forth.
And maybe Shammai
Okay.
was wise for doing
And
so.
Shammai absolutely had his reasons for it, because the person's starting point was something that Shammai could not deal with. Hillel believed that from this person's starting point, he could begin the process of education. Okay, and how did he begin the process of the education? Okay, so there's actually what did Hillel actually say? He said,
What's hateful to you?
Silver rule.
He did the negative. What's hateful to you?
and what's
did that
hateful
over
to
there.
you, don't do
Don't
to
do
to another. And the fact is
The rest
is
commentary.
that the rest is something you have to learn about.
Yeah.
In other words, when you go up to him and say, "Love your neighbor as yourself," that's all of Judaism. I'll come up to you and say, "Okay, how does my keeping kosher and not eating a Big Mac makes me a better person in terms of love your neighbor?" That's what you have to figure out. Mm-hmm. And that's what threw the guy off.
So Shammai was picking up on the guy's flippancy or something?
The guy was saying like I want to have, what was he saying? I want to teach children. I want to have one principle that I can follow. Okay? So Shammai said there is no one principle. The idea of there being one principle is a simplicity to Torah which is problematic.
Yeah, but we also say like the Aseret Dibrot is basically
613
and then someone narrows it down to 3.
Right.
And,
The point is that I mean that was one of the arguments with the Rambam when he came up with the idea of the Ikarim.
Right.
All of them are Ikarim. So therefore, what's the Ikar? The point of the matter is don't try and make this simple. It is a very complicated system. What Hillel said, okay, I'm going to make it simple. E equals MC squared. Well, what does that mean? Go study. Go study. Go figure it out. Oh, it'll take you a few years to go figure it out. Maybe your whole life and you still won't get it?
Maybe.
Well, that's the way it is. What Hillel said was not basically saying, I'm going to be more lenient and so forth and so forth. He said basically, okay, I happen to have a certain principle. Now, the truth is, what most people don't recognize is Rashi has two understandings of what that statement was. Okay, what's it? What
Hillel said to him?
Hillel said to him. What was it? So one understanding is like love your neighbor as yourself. Don't do it to the other what you don't want to do to yourself, and so forth.
The
what's
mitzvahs are ultimately in service of
what does Rashi say? The other point is,
Okay.
don't do to the other what you don't want done to yourself.
What's that?
Yeah.
Okay, what was that? He says the other is a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Don't do to God what you don't want done to yourself. Okay, in other words, basically he was saying, listen to God. Okay, now the truth of the matter is Rashi completely changes that understanding. Everyone thinks he's making a nice, love your neighbor, something like that. The fact that he's making a strong religious statement. The point is there are actually 3 cases in the Gemara that talks about a ger who comes with this kind of thing.
Oh, right,
and
the heads are bigger than the feet.
No, that's something different.
That's also
that's
Maybe
another story.
do
But
to
the fact
Acher
is,
what you wouldn't want Acher to do to you.
the fact is that what he says. What the fact is there are 3 stories where a ger comes with a certain view of Judaism, and Beis Shammai is basically saying, "I'm not interested in dealing with your view of Judaism. I'm sorry, get out of here, because your starting point is unacceptable." Beis Hillel basically said, "Oh, I can deal with your starting point." But his first step in dealing with those starting point was to show that the starting point you're starting with is absolutely incorrect. And therefore the conclusion of them is and that was really an educational model. And that's where they say Beit Hillel did have, Beit Hillel, you talk about Chesed, whatever, the Beit Hillel, that Hillel, not Beit Hillel, but Hillel had a certain amount of sensitivity, although Shammai was also extremely sensitive. I mean, Shammai is the one who says respect others and so forth. But the fact is that Hillel basically said, listen, I could take your starting point and show you that it's incorrect. And once I show you that it's incorrect, then we can go from there. And that's what happened with these.
What's starting point is incorrect?
This idea that you can do Torah on one foot. I can give you Torah on one foot equals MC squared. Oh, what does that mean? Oh, now you have to work on it.
So why couldn't Shammai have said also?
Because Shammai felt that was the difference between Shammai.
So they're both saying that it can't be done on one foot. Except that Shammai Hillel detailed it more.
Right.
What did Shammai say?
Hillel
sent them
They're
away?
both saying that he has the wrong starting point, but Hillel was insightful enough to correct his starting point.
Right.
So Shammai was less patient or something, but
whatever. No, Shammai wasn't that type of educator. Okay, he basically whatever it is. Now you're getting into issues of personality.
Maybe they need each other. Maybe they complement.
Shammai and Hillel. Yes, the fact is, maybe in certain way, the fact that the ger comes to Hillel the next time, maybe Hillel had a way of dealing with after Shammai already said, you've already seen some anger that way. But the point is what Shammai and Hillel do is basically come across with an idea. The point is what I'm really trying to get at from this idea here is that what I'm really trying to say is that there's a certain level in Jewish thought of being intellectually consistent. You don't accept any dribble that comes out of someone. It's a highly developed analytical analysis of Torah. It demands thought, involvement, and so forth. Okay? Basically, it doesn't let every opinion through the door. But at the same point in time, it recognizes that even if you work on something, there's not going to just end up with one opinion. That's the way God created the world. And therefore, the fact that you continue on tells you that you have to be a questioner. Okay? And that's something, and this is something that comes out, let's say, in terms of belief. Now, I was going to get into differences between within the system, without the system. Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel are talking within the system. There's obviously much more respect for divergent opinions within the system. But the truth is even the way the Jew looks at someone outside the system, with concepts such as tinik shenishpa and that kind of concept, we have a certain recognition that there is that absence, like the Chazon Ish says, absence a mirror, a nes nigla, an open miracle, right? We can't absolutely say we have an argument. That's why everyone today, according to the Chazon Ish says, there's no real heretic today, because we have no one who we can really prove the existence of God to. Okay, the truth of the matter is, it took Pharaoh until after they say that after 5 Malkot he was willing to sit there and say, let's kick him out. Okay, because I'm not interested in the consequences. That's why people say they hardened Pharaoh's heart. So some people say, what does it mean? It means it made Pharaoh continued believing what he wanted to believe, even though he was suffering for it. Normally he would have given in to his pain and the country's pain, but God said, no, we're going to just deal with what you believe. But when he came back from the Red Sea, he said, in the great tone of Yul Brynner, he is God. Absolute proof that we had it. At Har Sinai, we have another case of absolute proof that's God telling these things. The point is, right? The point is, after that, we live without absolute proof.